Hi, this is Mark Rappaport. I'm not in right now, but there's a clip from a movie that I'd like you to look at till I get back. You may not like it, but it's the chance we both have to take.
We'll argue and squabble, we'll abuse each other, we'll treat each other like dirt. We'll break up vowing eternal vengeance, doing a whole backbiting, backstabbing, bad-mouthing number on each other. Come on, give it a whirl. It'll be fun. Take a chance on love.
An amusing moment from Impostors, a film with no stars, and it's not from a major Hollywood movie company, so you may be thinking, what is it doing on Sneak Previews? Well, it's being reviewed here on a special edition of our show, a look at low-budget, independent American films. Across the aisle from me, Roger Ebert, film critic of the Chicago Sun-Times.
And across the aisle from me is Gene Siskel, film critic of the Chicago Tribune. Well, on this special edition of Sneak Previews, Gene and I have some movie surprises we want to share with you. We're going to show you some new American movies that were filmed outside the mainstream by talented young directors who are definitely not part of the Hollywood establishment. Independent films are not financed by major Hollywood studios. They usually don't have big stars in them, and their directors often have to scrape and borrow to raise the shooting budgets. And they have one other thing in common. They're movies that their makers felt had to be made no matter what. And who knows, from the ranks of today's independent filmmakers may come tomorrow's superstar directors. That's the way it sometimes happened in the past. George Lucas, who made Star Wars, Martin Scorsese, who made Raging Bull and Taxi Driver, John Carpenter, who made Halloween, they all began their directing careers as independent filmmakers. And now comes the next generation. What we have on this program is a cross-section of what's been happening in the last year or so in American independent films. And Gene starts with an independent film that's already achieved some box office success, Return of the Secaucus Seven.
Our first film, director John Sayles' Return of the Secaucus Seven, is, I think, the best film of our bunch. Roger, you may disagree, but I want to be very clear about this up front, that my critical standards aren't dropping on this show just because this film was made independently of the Hollywood mainstream. This is simply an excellent film that accomplishes some very tricky things, juggling the stories of a whole bunch of young people who come together for one of their annual college reunions, this one occurring a decade after their graduation in the 60s. Here's the way the women react to each other as they play the game of Clue one afternoon.
Let's see, Miss Scarlet in the library with the candlestick. Are you and Mike planning on having any kids?
Mike definitely wants them, but I'm not so sure. I'd like about 15 years to make up my mind.
I'm sure I want them, but who with?
Put an ad in the classified.
Wanted, father, lover, Rock of Gibraltar.
Someday my prince will come.
So what do you do?
I don't know, my mother raised us alone. She was miserable, but she did it.
Playing theater games with other people's little darlings was enough for me, for a while anyway.
Professor Plum in the study with the knife.
I'd have a kid right now if things were right.
Would the senator give you maternity leave?
The senator. I figure I'd want to get to know a guy up close for a couple of years before I went in on kids with him. I'm 30, right? Puts a certain amount of pressure on.
You wish you'd had him when you were younger?
Sure. Me and Dwight. The kid would have been born with a dexedrine habit.
Right. And come out in a little gelatin capsule.
Oh, why fantasize? If it happens, it happens. Maybe I'll be 40 and adopt some 13-year-old girl's illegitimate child.
If she'll give it up. Right. Beats the hell out of a Barbie doll.
Oh, June, I'm home.
In here, Ward! What?
It's a little game we play. Leave it to Beaver.
It's still rare in American movies to see a scene consisting of just women talking in a group. That's one thing that's special about American independent films. Corporate Hollywood tends to think that such scenes are weak. But that scene is only one of many such conversations in Return of the Secaucus Seven. In fact, the entire movie is full of conversation, and that is what is most impressive about this film. It is not an action-packed film. It's virtually all just people talking about their pasts and nervously approaching their futures. And yet their stories are just as compelling as any Hollywood car chase. It's a very wise and gentle film. I like it a lot.
Gene, I'm in agreement with you on this one. I really like this film, and I really got into it. I began to feel somehow they met my friends and made a film about them. I knew these people, you know, as they go kicking and screaming into their 30s. They were young for years and years and years. And suddenly they've got wives, they've got husbands, they've got children and responsibilities. And you know what I thought of several weeks ago when John Lennon was assassinated, and I thought for all of us that took us back, at least those of us who were in our 30s, to the times in the 1960s when we were listening to the Beatles. That was our generation. This film takes us back to the same time.
Well, it's a high compliment for a film because it's much more difficult when we see a film that's about the people that we think we are. In other words, a film made often another foreign country, we're not so sure if they got it right. But we think they have to get it right when they make it about us. So it's a high compliment to this film that we're saying it's about us and we like it an awful lot.
And you can't find fault and say, no, I'm not like that, right? Our next film is a movie that I really like a whole lot. It's called Heartland, and it's about the pioneers who settled the great, empty American West. Heartland tells the story of a widow and her young daughter who take the train west from Kansas City out to the wilds of Montana, where the woman takes a job as a housekeeper and cook on an isolated ranch. The film has a lot of beautiful images in it, but the heart of its achievement is in the performance of a relatively unknown actress named Conchata Ferrell, who plays the young widow with a combination of fierce determination and stalwart tenderness. Here she is getting instructions on how to keep house from her new boss, played by Rip Torn.
You milked, Mrs. Randall?
Yes, sir.
Butter will be a good thing again. Jack and me for meals. You said you'd cook for railroad crews, so the Hayen and Brandon won't give you much trouble.
No, sir.
For our washing, the tub's in the storeroom. As soon as the weather eases up, you'll want to get a garden started there. I think we have some seeds left.
Mr. Stewart, in your letter, you said $7 a week. In Denver, I got $1.80 a day just for washing.
Well, I don't guess Burnt Fork's quite caught up to Denver. I'll show you the chickens and pigs tomorrow.
I've always had my Sundays free after breakfast.
All right?
Will that be all? Good night, Mr. Stewart.
I love that woman's performance, and I love the clear and direct sound of her voice. You don't feel that there's an actor's method that's coming between us and the screen. That's her character speaking directly to us. I really like it. And the relationship between that plucky woman and the cantankerous rancher develops into an interesting marriage. There's more of a truce there than a romance. Heartland was directed by Richard Pierce on a low budget by Hollywood standards. It cost about $700,000, but its photography is magnificent and it captures the real epic feel of the American West. We get to know the people, too, the shy, stubborn, and brave people who challenge that land. We haven't had many westerns with women like this before, or many movies with such interesting women characters, and this movie was produced by a women's collective in Missoula, Montana, Wilderness Women.
Well, I liked part of the film. I liked the opening half of it. I think it really does give a great sense of the time, and it looks accurate, and a real feeling for the settling of the West not so long ago. For me, the film runs down in the second half with lots of adversity, one calamity after another, and because of that, it's repetitious for me, and I don't think it's as great as you do. But one interesting question, when you said the Women's Collective, I thought I heard out in Hollywood a whole bunch of screams, because somebody could say, oh, they're liking it because it's Women's Collective rather than, say, Warner Brothers. In other words, it's a lot easier, someone might say, to like a women's collective, root for the underdog, rather than a big, giant conglomerate. So what do you say to that?
I say, no, I don't like it for those reasons. I like this film because I sat there for nearly 2 hours and I was totally absorbed by this story. I had never seen a Western that was made so close to the earth and so close to the rhythms of these people's lives. And it taught me a lot about the history of this country. That's why I liked it. I don't really care who made it.
Okay, just checking.
Okay.
Our next film comes from Texas. It's called The Whole Shooting Match, and it's the often funny, charming story of a couple of woe-begotten good old boys named Frank and Lloyd, who are always short on money, but long on money-making schemes. The schemes regularly fail, as Frank points out to Lloyd as they ride in the cab of a truck. This film was photographed in black and white.
Well, it got me an idea. Got me an idea about us going into polyurethane business.
You serious?
Yeah. It's the new thing. I've got it on good information. It's going to be the coming thing. We can get in on the ground floor because there's nobody else around here doing it. They use it for insulation. Put it up in attics. They put it down in the middle of, in between walls. And these rich hippies like it, too. They put it over their houses.
They like it because it covers up their houses.
Now, this is a real good one, Lloyd. You want me to get in a business I can't even pronounce the name, Polly what the doodle all day? I mean, this is like the chinchilla business, Lloyd. How much do we lose on that one, huh? That was our program.
Them air conditioners.
I should be driving a chinchilla Cadillac by now. How about the frog farm? How much we drop on that one?
Well, now that was a case of getting in the market too late.
Too
Now,
late.
Just
How
about
about
the same
the
time we got in, the market
squirrel?
fell out.
The flying squirrels, Lloyd.
Well, this town didn't even have a mosquito fogger when we got them flying squirrels.
And my favorite line is, how about the frog farm? I like that. Now, you can tell that the film is made cheaply, and there's a technical mistake there that's pretty obvious. It's supposed to be a moving truck, but if you look at that, you can tell the truck isn't moving at all when they filmed it. But it's still a cute scene. And the point of the movie, which gets serious from time to time, is that Frank and Lloyd at the end are a lot better off busted than when they're flush with money. Well, that's easy for the filmmaker to say. The whole shooting match is by no means a perfect film. I didn't think it was. But it was made on a shoestring for less money than a Hollywood film crew spends each day before it breaks for lunch. And that's not an exaggeration. The film reportedly cost $30,000. The average Hollywood shooting day is now up to about $60,000. But when the film does work, it's because, not of any money considerations, it's because of two principal actors, particularly Sonny Davis, the guy who was driving the truck. He plays Frank, a character who is terribly frustrated. He's got a big spender mentality and a pauper's wallet. All in all, sort of like the whole shooting match, wishing mostly the film had established its serious tone a little earlier.
I like the movie, I think, even more than you did. I didn't mind the fact that the serious tone came in later because I felt they wanted to show us the desultory lives of these characters, kicking cans, playing pool, killing time, drinking beer, and then, as the film goes along, we suddenly begin to realize they have big problems. They're heavy drinkers, they're irresponsible, they're childish, and so forth.
I know that's what they tried to do, so let me say it another way then.
Okay.
I didn't like the way the comedy was played. Sometimes comedy is within character. The characters are funny and they don't know it. Other times we can tell when the director is trying to show us out in the audience that the characters are funny. That's the mistake I think they made.
I didn't pick up on that. One thing I did like about this film, I felt it gave a better picture of urban cowboys and good old boys, for example, than Urban Cowboy did.
Well, I disagree.
Okay.
That's a high praise, though, I must admit.
Let's call a truce on this one, move on to the next one. Next comes a really good ghost story, I thought it was good, called The Haunting of M by a young California director named Anna Thomas. And the first time I saw this film, I was almost immediately really drawn into it because it knows how to tell a ghost story. It doesn't have lots of special effects and cheap shocks to clutter things up. Instead, it seduces us, slowly and surely drawing us into its psychological web. The Haunting of M begins with a disturbing event. A family photograph is taken, and when the photo is developed, it mysteriously contains the figure of a young man who wasn't there, who couldn't have been there, who has been dead for more than 50 years.
I brought this. When the party ended early, I went home and developed it. It's the portrait. It's not very good, I'm afraid. I'm not a very good photographer yet. Actually, everyone is pretty clear, except for this man here. Maybe he moved, or I don't know. I'm afraid I don't even remember who he is. Is he one of the uncles?
You needn't apologize to me, Stefan. I don't know him either. And I'm probably related to him. Lena, who is this?
I'm damned if I remember. I'll have to ask Mama or Papa. Someone who came after supper, I suppose. Maybe he's a friend of one of the uncles.
I can't think who this is. Yet he does look familiar. Of course, we must know him. Doesn't he seem familiar, Lena? What a peculiar coat he's wearing.
Well, somehow we just instinctively know she's going to fall in love with that ghost, and she's going to get into a lot of trouble as a result. The Haunting of M is remarkable for a lot of reasons, in addition to the fact that it works, for me anyway, as a classic ghost story. It's a beautifully photographed film, shot on location in and around an old castle in Scotland, and this movie is great to look at, great to get into, and the last half hour is about as scary as any ghost story I've ever seen.
You may be easily scared, because I don't share your enthusiasm for the film. The problem for me, here is where now we have our first real big disagreement. I really got tired by it. You know, the turn of the screw, that's what I felt like was happening to me. I got very, and I don't mean that in a complimentary way, I got bored by the film. As I see this scene again, it reminds me how technically good it is, and you're right there. But for me, it was more of a yawn. You know, you either get with a thriller or a ghost story, or you don't, and I lost this one pretty early on and was not moved by it and thought it should have been picked up the speed.
Well, with any ghost story, you almost have to make a suspension of disbelief, and you have to get into it and kind of get yourself in tune with the lives of the characters. That's what happened to me here. I saw this movie with an audience of about 900 people at a film festival, and you could have heard a pin drop because the story really got, I think, all of us really involved. So I stand behind it. I liked it. I had sympathy for it, and it just wasn't your day.
Well, there may have been people like me in that 900, and they wouldn't have heard a pin drop either.
Because you would have been snoring, right?
Thank you. No, just quiet. Gail Youngin is our next film. It's set in the rural Georgia in the 1930s, and it's a remarkably fine recreation of that time and place. It's the drama of a plain Jane widow who is hit upon by a young dandy who wants to use her to make money. He's setting up an illegal moonshine still on her property. Their love affair and the marriage is the talk of the rural town. Midway through the film, the young scoundrel's contempt for his wife is accelerated when he brings home a young woman, a Gail Youngin, and begins sleeping with her right in the same house. He's told this Gail Youngin, she's a true innocent, that his wife is just a housekeeper. Here's the scene where the young woman learns the truth.
Who do you figure I am, anyway?
The lady lives in Track's house.
Track's house. Trax lives in my house. Guess you never heard of such thing as a wife, huh?
Trax just says the old woman. Trax said you'd romp on me, but you ain't. I've been romped on. Pa romped on me regular.
You got your own folks, then?
Yes'm, but I don't know where he is. He run a blacksmith shop and garage off in the hard road. But he closed up and go to Georgia with a lady. And then I come and live with this other lady down the road a piece. Trax sold her liquor. That's how I come to know me. Then she moved on and he taken me with him from there. Now I'm gonna live with him. And you.
Why, you ain't nothing but pure and simple.
Don't you touch her. You hurt that gal young and you see the last of me.
You get her out of here before I hurts her and you both. Take your gal, young'un, and get.
I had no idea going. Me and Ellie will be here right along.
I can hurt air one of you with just my hand.
Not me, you can't. Let me tell you something, old woman. I'm too quick for you. And if you hurt Ellie, you crack down on her with those big hands of yours. You got any idea of knife? I'll get you sent to the chair or up for life. And I'll be here right in these flat woods or in that house. Right along. And that'd suit me just fine.
A strong scene in a highly dramatic film. That old woman's heart is falling apart because not only is she finding something out, she's realizing this whole romance was a complete sham. Of all the films that we're going to be taking a look at on this show, the director of this film, Victor Nunez, shows about as much promise, I think, as anyone. This is a totally professional film, revealing the way lonely people's lives can get horribly twisted as they search for companionship. My only other major complaint, I guess, is that the film moves incredibly slowly at the end, as the director often gets so involved in setting a slow southern mood that he seems to overestimate the patience of the audience. But otherwise, Gail Youngin is just fine.
I think it's just fine, too. I think you're overstating the case when you say incredibly slowly. It does move slowly, and there were times when I wished that he could have done without a shot or without a repetition of something in the plot. But on the other hand, sometimes I think these independent filmmakers are able to savor the lives and moods and tempos of their characters. And a lot of Hollywood films are directed for that TV attention span. Anything lasts longer than 30 seconds, and you're going out in the kitchen to make yourself a sandwich. So I like the feeling of this film.
I know the point that you're, I don't know if it applies here, but I know the point. The point you're making is very important. Hollywood films frequently are made with that TV quick, is the audience going to get it? And these people, working independently and not concerned about whether the film's going to sell, make it from their heart and get into the story more. So that's I think it's a good point and a good distinction.
A good point, I agree, and also one that applies to the next film, which is a very different film from the others we've had on this program, and a very experimental film. Its name is Impostors, and it's the 5th movie made by an independent New York filmmaker named Mark Rappaport, who has a very distinctive visual style. His settings are always surrealistic. His characters are always deliberately stiff. Their dialogue is always deliberately arch and mannered, but then he throws you a curveball. There's a great contrast between the formality of their behavior and his plots, which are almost always made up of lurid, melodramatic, sexy, violent, soap opera ingredients. Impostors is the story, more or less anyway, of two sinister magicians in search of some ancient Egyptian jewelry. And look at the contrast here between what we see and what they're saying.
Hiding out in the formal gardens all night. I thought we'd never find our way out of that maze.
You made a mistake killing the girl.
After all, she was in the way. She knew too much.
She knew so little.
The same thing?
No, with too much we can find the jewels. Maybe. With too little we find too many false clues or recalcitrant dummies who think they're protecting something. She was a princess. She loved me. Think of it. I could have married a princess.
All bourgeois dreams end the same way. Marry royalty and escape. She was after your money.
What money?
How was she to know how poor we were? We had a very good front in those days. That's what was on her mind.
You say that about every woman I look at.
Good riddance, I say.
Oh, sure. Her brother wouldn't even look at you.
Such charming green eyes.
Thinks that I gavoted and cavorted
and
with
coveted.
A Habsburg descendant.
Pretender.
Those were the days.
I need some of my money back for train fare.
We can drive back tomorrow.
Rappaport loves stiffly formal camera movements with the most bizarre consequences.
I can catch the last train back.
You know you don't have to.
Please.
You never know what's going to happen next in a movie like Impostors. You're sitting there watching one sort of chain of events, then something comes in right out of left field and catches you off guard. Well, I happen to like Mark Rappaport's films, but I know there are some people who think he's not exactly directing with a full deck. I think maybe one way to approach Rappaport is to let his films grow on you. He's got a unique vision he's working on. He wants to present his scenes in such a distinctive way that we can't just passively watch the movie's events unfold before us. We have to choose sides and make up our minds about them. Are they supposed to be funny? Are they supposed to be tragic? Is it art? Is it pulp melodrama? Some audiences get angry during Rappaport's films. They say they don't look like ordinary movies. Well, that's right, they don't. They look like a universe all their own.
Well, now it's time for either Old Grouchy or the voice of reason. I think he's playing with about a half a deck, maybe.
Really?
And I wish he played with that half more. And here's what I mean.
Okay.
I think that this guy has a marvelous, serious film within this film, and I think that the comedy screws it up, or his comedic style. There's a love story here. We saw the characters at the end of that clip. And I got very captivated by their love story at the very end of the film and felt sort of cheated. Felt that there was the story, and the rest was a lot of artifice, and it reminds me sometimes of people, young people particularly, who aren't confident enough to play with pure emotion, and so sometimes put a veneer of cuteness on the film, and that's the way I responded to it. So it's not a flat-out rejection, it's a wanting more.
I think that the more that you want is for Rappaport to make ordinary films.
Now, why would I want ordinary?
Well, I don't know. You sound as if you want psychological realism here. You got involved in the love story. You wanted to know more about those two characters. I think those are the farthest things from Mark Rappaport's mind. He creates a visual universe that is totally distanced from any kind of ordinary, realistic behavior. These characters don't live on planet Earth. I don't know why they should behave the way you want them to.
Well, they look to me like they might live on planet Earth.
Well,
some of the emotions
okay.
seem to be the kinds that I, as an occupant of the planet, have. And I think he's going to, I hope, that he will have the confidence to shoot a little straighter. And
I think you should give him a chance to be more individualistic and to move right out of the mainstream, as I think he does.
Okay. Well, let's take a second look at our 6 independent American films. First was Return of the Secaucus Seven, an affectionate and witty portrait of a college reunion. Also Heartland, a realistic saga of the founding of the not-so-old West. The whole shooting match, 2 good old boys realizing that the pot of gold at the end of their rainbow wasn't worth as much as they had hoped. The Haunting of M, the gothic thriller that Roger loved, but I found awfully slow. Impostors, the whimsical comedy where, again, Roger and I split, sort of. And Gal Young, an Agreement Here, a powerful drama about manipulation and human loneliness set in the Deep South.
Well, I guess the question is, if these films are as interesting, most of them anyway, as we seem to think they are, where do you go to see them? And that sometimes is a problem with independent films, because the big studios and the major national exhibition chains tie up most of the screens in this country all year long with ordinary mainstream product. And these films have to find their way around that. Now, some of them do make it into commercial theaters. Secaucus 7 is in release right now in big cities in this country. Heartland is going into big release. But for the rest, how do you find them? You have to read the paper. You have to read your regional arts magazines and find out that they might be playing at campus film societies, revival theaters, little art theaters, might be on local or regional television or even on PBS someday.
A good rule of thumb is the more it's like a Hollywood film, the more it's likely to be played like a Hollywood film.
Right.
But I don't mean to cheap out Secaucus 7 with that remark, because I think the reason that Secaucus 7 is the first of this gang to play is I think it's clearly the best film.
It's a very good film, but also I like The Haunting of M. I like Gal Youngin.
Gal Youngin, too.
You know, it's funny, the bad films have a way of finding you, but you've got to go out and find the good films. And now we're going to close this show with sort of a behind-the-scenes view of the life and times of the independent American filmmaker. How does he get his films off the ground? What are his methods and inspirations? Well, Mark Rappaport, the director of Impostors, the last movie we looked at on this program, made a videotape not long ago in which he explains the tools of his trade, including the telephone, the credit card, and the typewriter.
A tour of the filmmaker's most important tools, essential in writing scripts, has other uses as well. To do the tour justice, we should go to the bank and also the post office. A lot of time is spent in both of these venerable institutions if you're an independent filmmaker.
Making love on the phone. Love on the phone. Making love on the phone. Love on the phone.
Hello?
I call your number.
Yeah, speaking. Oh, hi. How are you? They want money.
So that's the main difference maybe between independent filmmakers and Hollywood, is that the independent filmmakers are always broke.
Very good. That's it for this special program on independent films. Join us next week on Sneak Previews when Roger and I return to reviewing mainstream commercial releases. Until then, see you at the movies.
Funding for Sneak Previews was provided by this station and by other public television stations.